Hi, hello. Welcome to another episode of Isaiah's Newsstand. It's your host, Isaiah Edwards. The date is September the 10th, 2023. Hopefully, this episode finds you well, in good spirits, and high hopes. As for me, I'm doing pretty good. Let's see, I had a really fun night last night. I wound up going out, doing some Northside hangs with the homies. Had a really good time. Did it up. And, of course, my favorite part is I didn't puke. I always love that. I always love when I get to, round all my bases and, I didn't throw up at the end of the night. So we rallied and that was great. Let's see. Food corner, I did have some pizza at Chameleon and it was yummy. I will say it was like so hot and gooey that I had to eat it with a fork. And I'm like, you know what? Hey, this is growing up, right? This is getting older. Sometimes you got to make these decisions. You got to boss up and just pick up the fork. I don't know. So that's what we did. So that was good. That was tasty. Also, just like finishing out the night like in Max Rat fashion, I like ended with like a cracker and a nice piece of cheese, and that was nice. It was really cute. Let's see. Also, a little gaming corner. I actually got to game instead of just spectating for a change. My friend, he got Baldur's Gate 3. I've talked about that game before on the pod, and I'm a big fan. Really enjoy it. And he explained to me like how cool the couch co-op was. I was like, oh yeah, I know it's a thing. And he's like, yeah, you can just like make a character and just hop in if you want. And I was like, what? Like I was just like kind of thrown off by that. And you just like, pop in the character, and that's what we did. So I was able to play. I made my little half orc character. So that was fun. It was cool. Did some slaying. All right. Let's see. Enough about the gaming. Enough about the pizza. Let's talk about some news before I take my little break, or after I take my little break, I should say. Before, during, after. News is happening all the time, everywhere, all at once. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Gulping down some yummy water today. Try to stay hydrated. All right. From Reuters, G20 summit wraps up in New Delhi. Macron says it confirms isolation of Russia. The G20 summit in New Delhi ended in Sunday as India handed over the bloc presidency to Brazil, while both the US and Russia praised the consensus that did not condemn Moscow for the war in Ukraine, but called on members to shun its use of force. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi asked the group leaders to hold a virtual meeting in November to review progress on policy suggestions and goals announced at the weekend. So, yeah, the top, global, heads of the world, like 20 of them, all got together. I believe Russia participated, but not the president. Putin. Putin didn't show, and then Xi Jinping did not show up as well. But a lot of big heads came together. They did some smoozing. I think they did some like bare feet walking to Gandhi's like memorial or something. I guess that was a thing. But yeah, a lot of talk this year was about the Ukraine Russia situation. I can't remember if we talked about the G20 last year or the last time it was a thing, but then it was also that, talking about the invasion, of Russia into Ukraine, all that bullshit. And they were a little bit more harder there, like a little bit more like stern. But in this situation, they kind of not had a neutral thing. They were just saying like, hey, the taking of territory is wrong, but they didn't call out Russia like they did before. So I mean, the West kind of says, hey, we got what we needed to get out here. We got a good statement out. This was good. Apparently, Russia's kind of like, hey, they didn't like actually call us out or anything like that. So that kind of abides what we wanted. Ukraine's like, we're not happy with this. We didn't like what we heard here. But, that's kind of more or less the takeaway here. It was a lot of chit chatting, declarations to work on this, that, and the third. It's supposed to be like a big schmoozing thing. I feel like for these political leaders, they do a lot of side talk. Do a little pull aside, little chit chats. But yeah, I mean, we'll see if anything comes of it. Hopefully, it's fruitful. I do think though this kind of adds to the number of like flexes for India, which is cool. It's very interesting. I've heard a lot of talk about just the conversation of competition between India and China because it's a race on population, and I think they say that like India is now shot up and ahead now with the highest like population, and it's just where they're gonna go with it, where they're gonna go with their policies and things of that nature, and their progress in terms of an industry, yada yada yada, all that shit. So and we talked about this before. They went to the moon. They're still doing that shit. I think they're doing like solar surveys of the sun or something like that. But yeah, I mean, big things are happening for India. Big talks are happening, and I guess Brazil is up next. But yeah, we can go ahead and move along now. From the Guardian, complete models of human embryos created from stem cells in lab. Researchers have created complete models of human embryos from stem cells in the lab and grown them outside of the womb in work that paves the way for advances in fertility, pharmaceutical testing, and transplants. Tiny balls of tissue were made by combining stem cells that arrange themselves into structures that mimic the 3D organization of all the known features found in human embryos from 1 to 2 weeks old. This is the first embryo model that has structural compartment organization and morphological similarity to a human embryo at day 14, said Professor Jacob Hanna, who led the research at Weizmann Institute in Israel. At 2 weeks, the ball cells were about half of a millimeter wide. Now, also, I believe it's very key on how they're describing this, saying that, look, this is a model, it's not a human. And, there's more instances on like why it is that way, or how they can say that. But this is also, I think, from, listening to like the BBC News podcast, they say that this is a bit of a loophole where because it's not human, there isn't that like there's a 2 week stoppage where you can't do any kind of real human embryo testing. Like it's deemed unethical. So this isn't a human, and they're like, look, by all definition, it couldn't be like melded to the womb or like stitched to the womb. We can't do that. There's no brain activity or anything like that. This is just for the research purposes, the things that we might want to do for it, and that's it. But they want to be able to go longer than the 14 days and do more experimentation, so this is how they're able to do it. But it does feel like the way I read it and some of the takeaways, it's just like, well, I mean, it seems like you could just augment it to maybe make it, and if you could successfully sew it to the womb, right? I don't know. I mean, this is me speculating and just thinking, like, would that work? And I'm over here thinking, like, oh my gosh, like you could literally like be making little stem cell babies. And the conversation of stem cells is interesting to me. I can't remember. It was just sometime post Dolly the llama, the little clone thing, and I remember there was always a lot of talk about stem cells. And I was like, this is a very interesting conversation. I have no idea what's going on. I just know that like conservatives are really mad about it and they do not want us to be experimenting on stem cells. They think it's really bad. But it also seemed interesting because it's like, it seems like with these stem cells, you could like do just a crazy, amazing things to help the human body and just do great advancements. So I was very like curious where that might go someday. And now look at us. We're like over here just arguing about other stupid, dumb shit that we shouldn't be, and just not allowing people to be people and have their rights and autonomy. But whatever. I do find this to be a cool jump in science. I don't know where it's gonna go in terms of like if people are gonna naysay it or just be super happy. It seems like they're happy from this article. It seems like there's a lot of things that they might be able to do. Let me see. I do want to read this quote here. Do they have the right to give their own skin cells to make an embryo model and make cells that will save their lives or solve their medical need? That is a scenario that should be considered. This was Hannah, I believe, like a scientist researcher, before growing a model embryo for donor tissue, scientists could tweak its genetics to ensure it did not develop a brain or nervous system. He added, but I mean, that's a tweak, right? So what if you like untweaked it? I don't know. That to me was just like a super interesting part of it, because I'm like, ooh, clones. But like I said, the idea of saying, hey, we can make this tailor fitted to you, and we could grow the organs and the things that you needed for the future, and you could use those. And it's also cool that they describe how like flexible the human cell is, that it can like at a very early state it can like become whatever you like kind of want it to be, or a lot of like different type of things. And so yeah, I just found this all interesting. Obviously, I'm not doing it any kind of justice, but please check out this complete model human embryo, either from the Guardian or wherever. Because I would love to talk about this with some other people, or maybe people with bigger brains on this issue, and like maybe have a little bit more know or knack. Because I don't know, I find it fascinating. All right, moving on to some, I guess you can say, social news that has become now legal news. Um, Family vlogger Ruby Frank and business partner Jody Hildebrandt will remain held without bail, judge says. Family vlogger Ruby Frank and her business partner Jody Hildebrandt will continue to be held without bail until their next scheduled court appearance, Judge Eric Gentry said during a virtual hearing on Friday. Franke and Hildebrandt were each charged with 6 counts of felony child abuse by the Washington County's Attorney's Office last week. Each count carries a prison sentence up to 15 years and a fine of $10,000. The two were arrested on August 30th after law enforcement found Franke's emaciated 12-year son with open wounds and duct tape on his ankles and wrists after he had escaped from Hildebrandt's home. Franke's 10-year-old daughter was found in similar malnourished condition at Hildebrandt's home. So shit, like that's some crazy shit. And I'm not super familiar with this vlogger. Apparently she refers to herself as like a momfluencer, but I just know that like, I mean, at least towards the top of September I started hearing this. There's a excerpt from page 6 where YouTuber Ruby Franke previously denied child abuse after son Chad slept on beanbag for like 7 months. Essentially, he had been doing a prank, and for punishment, she said that you can't sleep in this room anymore. You have to sleep somewhere else. So pick somewhere else. And I guess the best he, figured out of his options was like, I guess I'll sleep in this beanbag chair. And that was all he was allowed to sleep on for months. She denies this. The YouTube got like deleted, all this kind of shit. But apparently this is a very scandalous situation. They had a lot of very like controversial, takes about like, if your kids are doing things that you don't agree with, you're like, you should just be allowed to just like shun them, not talk to them. Like, I don't know. It just seemed very edgy, very controversial. And then just to see, apparently behind the scenes, you actually peek behind the curtain and there's just literal actual abuse. And not to mention, it's abuse that's like more or less documented. People are literally seeing, there's neighbors calling about it. And, the DCFS or whatever it is, what is it, Department of Child and Family Services. They say they went out a couple of times. There was a couple of situations, I believe, 2022, and there's also one in 2020. But there wasn't anything like fruitful, I guess, that really came out of it until now. It seems like at least the police and what is the trial system or whatever, with the bail being withheld. That's pretty big, so it seems like they're really responding to it. But it is seem like there's going to be maybe some independent investigating on DCFS for like their lack of attentiveness here, handling here. And there's some people saying, well, hey, maybe it's like kind of situation of people are maybe either starstruck or there's maybe enough to say, hey, they're flexing on the kids and the Franks or whatever, and then the stories maybe get changed. They go, oh well, maybe I might believe it. Maybe this is just like this mom influencer stuff, and I'm just not getting. But once again, if you're in the scene, you're in social service, you should be able to spot these signs. Like I'm not really trying to play devil's advocate for these people. Like this is your job, and if you see something very bad here, you should be calling that out. You should be talking about it, addressing it, and if there aren't valid answers, then yeah, there should be actions taken. So yeah, I mean, this was a fucked up story. I didn't really know if I was going to talk about it. I just kept seeing it. If I learn any more, if I decide to go fully down that rabbit hole, because I know there's a lot of like YouTube reactions to this shit, like documentary style shit, and I'm like, I really don't want to hit this K hole, but I might for y'all. I might for my newsies. All right, we have one more story to cover, and then I'll let you go for the Sunday fun day. All right. I'm gonna take my break though. Ooh, yeah. Okay. This is from WITN. Grand jury indicts Greenville mayor pro tem for withdrawing money from dead man's bank account. So this is pretty fucking savage. Let's go ahead and get into it. Let's talk about it. A grand jury has indicted an Eastern Carolina City Council member for allegedly withdrawing funds from a dead man's bank account. A Pitt County grand jury indicted Greenville Mayor Pro Tem Rose Glover on 2 counts of obtaining property by false pretense. According to the indictment, the false pretense consisted of the following. The defendant withdrew funds from an account owned by Howard Connor, a First Citizens Bank and Trust Company representing she and the authority to withdraw the funds when in fact she did not and Howard Connor was deceased. The indictment happened on June 7th and June 11th in 2019. I'm sorry. An obituary says Connor was a retired Greenville police lieutenant who died on June 6th of 2019. So, yeah, I mean, look, we say ACAB on this podcast, but god damn. Pro Tim, she was like, nah, I'm just gonna just take mine. How about for me? How about some for me? You're already gone, so, like, give me that. It's pretty fucked up. But Pitt County Sheriff Office Sergeant Lee Darnell said that the original investigation was requested by former Greenville Police Chief Mark Holtzman due to a conflict of interest at the department. So I can kind of imagine maybe they get hip to this story and they're mad, like, oh, she came for us, and they probably went like full blue wall. And like, and it seems like this guy was like, look, we're gonna bind our P's and Q's here, because I've rarely heard of a police officer, chief, whoever, actually citing and using like conflict of interest before an incident. Usually it is like, after the fact, and like it's like, oh yeah, no, internal affairs even said that this was a conflict of interest and you breached that. In this situation, they're like, no, we're gonna mind our P's and Q's here, we're gonna go along around the bend and we're gonna get this motherfucker. And they got her. So yeah, I mean, Glover was booked at the Pitt County Detention Center under $25,000 unsecured bond, $25,000, I'm sorry, not Singapore dollars, and has been since bonded out. Records show she has a Thursday morning court date. Sure. And that's it. That's the article. That's the story. That's the news. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for being a friend, and hopefully I see you soon for some more good news. I love ya. Bye bye. Mwah.